So I have this add function, which is a function expression that takes in two numbers and adds the two together. What I'd like to do is take advantage of the newer ES6 arrow function syntax to make my code a lot cleaner. So the first thing I'll do is to remove the function keyword, and then I will add an equal sign and a greater than sign, and then I can save and run the code. And the result I get is 5. Because the code inside of my function is so short, I can go a step further and clean up the syntax even more. So what I'll do is delete the return keyword and the brackets, and now my entire function is only on one line of code. A very common way to use arrow functions is as callback functions. So what I have here is a scores array, which is simply array of numbers, and then I have a sum scores variable, which takes the scores and uses the reduce method to total all of the scores. So what I'll do is, instead of using this function keyword callback function, I'll remove that, and then I'll use the arrow function syntax instead. Then we can run our code. 273. Going back to our previous example where we removed the return keyword, in this particular situation, I wouldn't bother doing that, as it would not really reduce the amount of code that we have in our example and make it more readable. Another common use case for arrow functions is to resolve the this keyword issue inside of objects. So what I have is a my classroom object that has students, which is an array of students, subject, which is math, and a roster method that will iterate over the students using the map method and return the following string for each student. This code appears to work as you would think, but it actually does not work. And the reason why is because since we're using the function keyword in our callback function, the this keyword does not point to our classroom object and instead points to the global object. So if we were using vanilla JavaScript, this code would run and we would just say undefined for this part of our string. But because we're using TypeScript, the code actually won't compile at all. To fix this issue, what we can do is use an arrow function as our callback by deleting the function keyword and then adding our arrow here. And now when we save and run our code, it should work as expected. And we get the expected output. It's important to keep in mind that just because arrow functions provide a shorter, more concise syntax, that we cannot simply replace any function that uses the function keyword with an arrow function, because arrow functions do not provide its on this keyword context. In this example, if we use an arrow function, we will get an error as this does not point to our profile object, but it will actually instead point to the global object. So to fix this, we would go back to using a function keyword. And then our code would actually work in this example. So in summary, we learned that we can use arrow functions as a shorter, more concise syntax in our code. We learned that arrow functions can help us solve the problem of using the this keyword inside of object methods, specifically those that have function keywords as the callback functions. And we also learned that because of the lexical this that arrow functions provide, that we cannot just simply replace all functions with arrow functions.